9/11, federal agents and law enforcement raid a northwest Miami-Dade warehouse.
FBI raid in Miami today.
Our sea drugs, as they call them, they use the term sea drugs, the drugs coming in by sea, are like 5% of what they were a year ago.
At exactly 2:17 a.m., something unprecedented happened at one of America's busiest shipping hubs. Cargo cranes froze mid-operation. Automated gates locked into emergency mode. Security cameras went dark. Not from a malfunction, but from a coordinated federal override. Within seconds, unmarked vehicles poured through restricted access lanes as tactical teams fanned out across the port. This wasn't a routine inspection. This was the takedown of a $920 million drug pipeline that had been hiding in plain sight. For months, federal analysts had been tracking irregularities buried deep inside global shipping data. Nothing obvious. No missed paperwork. No suspicious cargo labels. In fact, the shipments looked cleaner than most legitimate freight moving through the port. That was the first red flag. The numbers were too perfect. Every container cleared inspection on schedule. Every manifest aligned flawlessly with customs documentation. Every shipment passed through systems designed to flag even minor inconsistencies. To investigators, that level of precision signaled something far more dangerous than sloppiness. It suggested control. The deeper analysts dug, the clearer the pattern became. This was not a smuggling route built on chaos or corruption. It was an engineered pipeline, a system designed to operate invisibly inside legitimate global trade, and it all led back to one shipping hub. The facility itself looked unremarkable, a sprawling complex of cranes, storage yards, and administrative offices serving thousands of containers a day. But behind the routine movement of cargo was an operation moving drugs, money, and data with surgical precision. The shipments didn't arrive randomly. They followed a rhythm. Containers entered under different company names, each registered through separate shell entities. But behind the paperwork, investigators found the same digital fingerprints, identical routing logic, synchronized timing, and financial clearing through the same offshore channels. This wasn't coincidence. It was coordination. When federal cyber teams overlaid shipping data with encrypted financial transactions, the scale of the operation came into focus. Over the course of 18 months, more than $920 million in narcotics had moved through the hub, masked as legitimate freight, broken into manageable quantities, and dispersed across multiple states. No single shipment raised alarms. No single company looked suspicious. Together, they formed a pipeline unlike anything seen before. As the picture sharpened, federal leadership authorized a full interdiction. The goal was not just to seize product, but to understand the structure behind it. At 1:45 a.m., teams began moving into position. Federal agents quietly secured perimeter access points. Marine units monitored the harbor. Cyber teams isolated internal networks, freezing data streams mid-transfer. Within minutes, the entire facility was effectively sealed. Its operations paused without the workers inside even realizing what had happened. The breach began at 2:17 a.m. Teams moved through administrative buildings first, securing servers and documentation before any data could be wiped. Inside, they found extensive digital records detailing shipment schedules, routing algorithms, and contingency plans designed to reroute cargo the moment scrutiny increased. This was not a smuggling ring reacting to law enforcement. This was an organization anticipating it. Deeper inside the facility, agents discovered a secured operations center hidden behind a false wall. Inside were terminals linked to offshore servers, satellite communications equipment, and encrypted drives cataloging every movement through the port for nearly 2 years. The scale was staggering. But the most alarming discovery came from a set of internal reports marked continuity planning. These documents outlined how the operation would survive raids, investigations, and even asset seizures. Alternative routes, backup facilities, secondary shipping partners. The network wasn't built to avoid detection. It was built to survive it. As the sun rose, federal teams expanded the operation. Cargo containers across the port were flagged and isolated. Financial institutions were notified. Warrants were executed simultaneously in multiple states, tied to the same logistics chain. By midday, the scope of the operation had become undeniable. What began as a routine financial anomaly had exposed a $920 million transnational drug pipeline embedded directly within legitimate U.S. trade infrastructure. And this was only the first layer. Investigators soon realized the shipping hub wasn't the origin point. It was the middle. a critical junction connecting upstream suppliers and downstream distribution networks stretching across the country. The operation had functioned not through violence, but through precision. It exploited trust. It used compliant systems as camouflage. It turned efficiency into a weapon. And now, with the hub exposed, federal agencies faced a new challenge. Because dismantling the operation wasn't just about arrests, it was about dismantling a system that had learned how to hide in plain sight. The first seizures were only the beginning. As federal teams secured the shipping hub, intelligence analysts began working through the data recovered from the compound's internal servers. What they found reshaped the entire operation. The system wasn't just moving narcotics. It was managing flows of money, materials, personnel, and information with the efficiency of a multinational logistics corporation. Every shipment was tagged, time-stamped, and routed through layered verification processes that mimicked legitimate supply chains. But beneath the professional structure was a darker truth. The operation had been deliberately designed to exploit blind spots inside global trade systems. The same safeguards meant to protect commerce had been repurposed as cover. Shipping codes were rotated automatically. Paperwork cycled through shell offices registered in multiple jurisdictions. Disputes and inspections were delayed through administrative filings timed with procedural loopholes. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was accidental. The deeper investigators looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't a smuggling ring hiding from the system. It was a network using the system as its shield. By midday, federal analysts began correlating the shipping data with financial intelligence from multiple agencies. Patterns emerged that linked the Miami operation to a broader logistical web stretching across several states. Each node was subtle. Each appeared independent. But together, they formed a coordinated framework capable of moving massive volumes of illicit material while remaining nearly invisible. The network had one defining advantage. It understood bureaucracy better than most bureaucrats. Every transaction had a corresponding legal justification. Every transfer was paired with a compliance reference. Every red flag had a pre-written explanation ready before questions were asked. This was not organized crime as law enforcement had traditionally understood it. It was organized administration. As the scale became clear, the federal response escalated. Additional agencies were brought in under sealed directives. Digital forensics teams began mapping the structure backward, identifying upstream nodes and downstream distribution points. What they found was staggering. The shipping hub was only one of several interconnected control points. Others existed near major transportation corridors, all operating under similar models. Each one functioned as a relay, passing product and information along a chain that stretched far beyond state lines. The most unsettling discovery came from encrypted communications recovered from the hub's servers. Embedded within routine logistics messages were coded scheduling protocols, instructions for activating contingency routes, shifting volumes, and initiating dark cycles when law enforcement pressure increased. The language was technical, sterile, and deliberately opaque. This wasn't a criminal enterprise reacting to pressure. It was a system designed to absorb it. As investigators worked through the night, the scope of the operation forced a strategic shift. This was no longer about seizures or arrests. It was about dismantling an infrastructure that had learned to operate invisibly inside legitimate systems. By early morning, federal authorities initiated coordinated actions across multiple jurisdictions. Search warrants were executed quietly. Data centers were mirrored. Financial accounts were frozen under emergency provisions. At each location, the pattern repeated. Legitimate front operations, legally structured entities, carefully layered compliance mechanisms. Everywhere investigators looked, they found the same architecture, one designed not for speed or scale, but for resilience. And then came the most troubling discovery of all. Buried within the recovered data were internal contingency protocols outlining response plans in the event of law enforcement disruption. These documents detailed fallback routes, alternate service providers, and even replacement management structures. The operation had planned for exposure. It had planned for raids. It had planned for arrests, which meant the people behind it never expected to remain hidden forever, only long enough to extract maximum value before disappearing. By the time dawn broke over the port, the full scope of the operation was still coming into focus. But one conclusion was already unavoidable. The system uncovered at the shipping hub wasn't an isolated criminal enterprise. It was a template, a model designed to be replicated, scaled, and redeployed wherever oversight was weakest and bureaucracy most complex. Federal officials now faced a challenge unlike any before. Shutting down one node would not be enough. The architecture itself had to be dismantled, piece by piece, before it could reassemble somewhere else. As the operation entered its next phase, agencies prepared for a long fight, not against a single organization, but against a method of operating that thrived in the shadows of legitimacy. And for the first time, investigators were forced to confront a troubling reality. The greatest threat wasn't hidden in darkness. It was hiding in plain sight. By the time dawn broke over the port, the operation had already changed the direction of the investigation. What federal teams uncovered in the hours following the raid was no longer about a single hub, or even a single network. The data pulled from the seized servers revealed something far more unsettling: a blueprint, a repeatable structure capable of embedding itself into legitimate institutions without triggering alarms. This wasn't a cartel problem, it was a systems problem. As analysts began reconstructing the network, a pattern emerged across multiple states: identical administrative layouts, matching compliance templates, shared legal language reused across dozens of entities. Different names, different locations, but the same architecture underneath. The system had been designed to survive scrutiny. It didn't rely on intimidation or secrecy. It relied on procedural legitimacy, the kind that moves freely through regulatory frameworks, audits, and oversight mechanisms without raising alarms. By mid-morning, emergency briefings were underway in multiple federal offices. Agencies that rarely coordinated were suddenly sharing data in real time. Financial crimes units, homeland security analysts, cyber divisions, intelligence specialists. The picture forming on their screens was staggering. The Miami hub had been just one node in a network spanning logistics firms, legal service providers, shell corporations, and freight operations across several states. Each node appeared independent. Together, they formed a self-sustaining ecosystem designed to move illicit goods under the cover of compliance. What shocked investigators most was the level of foresight. The system accounted for audits before they happened. It anticipated regulatory pressure. It even modeled response times for enforcement actions, allowing operators to reroute activity before scrutiny escalated. This wasn't reactive criminal behavior. It was predictive. As the scope of the operation became clear, federal leadership authorized a second phase. Not raids, audits. Quiet, methodical, and surgical. Financial accounts were flagged, licenses suspended, corporate registrations frozen under emergency authority. In several states, offices linked to the same network went dark overnight. Employees arrived to locked doors and termination notices. Systems that had operated seamlessly for years simply stopped responding. There were no press releases, no announcements, only silence. Behind the scenes, investigators uncovered evidence that the network had already begun shifting operations internationally, preparing for the possibility that its U.S. footprint would collapse. Backup entities had been created, data mirrored, contingency plans activated. It was clear this was never meant to be a one-time operation. This was an adaptive structure, capable of shedding exposure and reconstituting itself elsewhere. That realization changed everything. What began as a domestic criminal investigation had evolved into a question of national resilience. How many similar structures were embedded in other sectors? How many operated just below detection thresholds, using legitimacy as camouflage? By the end of the week, internal assessments reached a sobering conclusion. The Miami operation had not been dismantled. It had been revealed. The difference mattered, because exposure forces a choice: retreat or escalation. And history suggested that networks built on precision and planning rarely retreat quietly. As one senior official summarized in a classified briefing, "We didn't shut down a criminal enterprise. We exposed a blueprint, and now we have to assume others are using it." In the days that followed, federal agencies began rewriting operational protocols. New oversight mechanisms were drafted. Interagency coordination expanded. Quiet alerts went out to institutions across the country. The message was clear. The rules had changed. What happened in Miami wasn't an isolated incident. It was a warning, a demonstration of how modern criminal systems adapt, evolve, and hide behind legitimacy. And while the fortress had fallen, the architecture it revealed would take years to dismantle. As the investigation moved into its next phase, one truth became impossible to ignore. The most dangerous threats no longer announce themselves. They integrate, they comply, they blend in. and by the time they're noticed, they've already won. And here's the part that should make everyone stop and think. What happened in Miami wasn't an isolated case. It wasn't a mistake, and it wasn't the end. What was exposed wasn't just a network. It was a blueprint, a system designed to hide in plain sight, to blend into institutions people trust, and to operate quietly until no one notices it anymore. And now that blueprint is out in the open, the question is no longer if similar operations exist elsewhere. It's how many and where. Because once a system like this is revealed, the next move is never random. It adapts, it spreads, it evolves, and the only way to stay ahead of it is to keep watching. So if you want to know what investigators uncover next, if you want to see how deep these networks really go, and if you want the truth before it disappears behind closed doors, subscribe now. The next chapter is already unfolding.